Hello. It's January 24th, 2023. It's a sidecar working group. Welcome, everybody. We have a relatively short agenda today. I wanted to just go through the cap and some comments. And I saw Clayton joined as well. So Clayton gave many interesting comments, and maybe we can dig into those. And then I started preparing some slides. I wanted to show the slides on SIG Node meeting that will be an hour later. And you can use the slides as well if you want for any reason. That said, let's get into, is there anything else on agenda? If you want to add something, please do it here. Yeah, let's go into CAP. So CAP is up and running, and I think maybe a better way to review it is to look through these comments. So one big comment was regarding init containers and regular containers sharing the schema, and this sharing of schema makes you make decisions and try to fit every decision you made for one type of containers to another type of containers. In this particular case, we introduced in the restart container restart policy for init containers, and it automatically creates the same restart policy for regular containers. And we don't intend to implement any of override possibilities today. And the question is, one of the questions is whether we need to split init containers and regular container schemas. I think, yeah, I think many people think we should split them. But looking at the amount of work needs to be done, it's like all trivial work, but it's a lot of work. So maybe, I don't know whether we need to take it on this cap or postpone this decision for later.
Well, so for ephemeral containers, we split them, and it was work, but it wasn't, it certainly showed it. Does somebody understand the full scope of work, or is this more of a point of concern? Because I don't know how accurate Tim's comment is. Tim may have looked at this recently, but with ephemeral containers, we did spend a fair amount of time trying to make this a little bit more palatable for other future changes.
Yeah, what I did yesterday, I just renamed init containers into, just create a new type for init containers. And it immediately shows many places when we do visit pattern, when we just go through all the containers and try to calculate some QoS, for instance, or some other things. It's not like overwhelming number of places, but it's enough to make it complicated. I think what this exercise gives me is clear understanding what places I need to revisit when implementation will start. So when we start implementing this cap, by looking at places where init and regular containers intermingle, we can clearly see like what needs to be adjusted for sidecars as well.
I don't know if this has already been discussed, but if ephemeral containers were introduced with a new type, that would be different than if we took existing init containers and then moved them to a new type, because they're already out there. If we introduce a new like sidecar container with a new type, that would probably be easier. I don't know what the implication on clients would be to like switching a type.
It's already, init container is already defined as an array of containers. So switching to new type, you'll be, I don't know what collection will be satisfied that it also have containers and sidecar containers, which will be quite tricky from typing perspective.
Yeah, that's the only complication I could see with this. I think I generally do agree that like having its own type is probably better. I'm just trying to think through the mechanics as best I can.
Okay, yeah, we went through renaming handlers Like we used to share a type of probes and handlers, like what is HTTP probe, what is HTTP handler, lifecycle handler. And we split those, I think, a couple of releases back. It was quite an easy exercise, basically renaming types Go and then going to every place that construct or somehow reference those types and like adjusting one way or another. And it was quite straightforward for that case because logic is not quite intermingled. In this case, it's a little bit more involved, I think. Okay, so I feel that general agreement that we may want to take this work on this cap. Okay. Yeah. So another thing there are comments. I think Clayton, you brought it again. We discussed it already, but it's worth rehashing and understanding what we can do about it. So if we introduce restart policy always, it may be a little bit confusing semantic for people for init containers, because it's unclear. Like it may not be very easy to grasp for people used to regular init containers that always will not be the same as on failure. So they get used to init containers being restarted whenever they need to be restarted. So it's always being restarted unless they complete it. So having always been restarted past the initialization stage may confuse people. Maybe we can come up with other names. vspod until pod shut down, and I also created more alternatives there in the document. Let me open files.
Can you guys hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, it's cutting out from my end, so I didn't catch all of it. If init containers are not regular containers, and there's confusion on the developer side, right? We've made accidents inside the kubelet thinking that they're the same. So that's, there's good reasons to split them and to treat them differently. But for all the places that they aren't different, we want to clearly communicate that they're the same. I feel like we are under documenting how init containers start, restart, and behave today. People have incorrect assumptions and they go through trial and error. Restart policy is so fundamental to the difference between init containers and containers that even though that today we don't allow it to be configured, they are not the same and they behave very differently. Reusing the same constant in two closely related places is just going to be a potential point of confusion. And so I understand there's a deeper discussion here. I may not be able to hear all the arguments for or against, but I think just based on that, no one should ever be surprised by looking at the restart policy and figuring out what it means. And I think emphasizing the difference in containers and init containers, if there's ever a field to do it on, it's going to be this, because they don't even have similar semantics, right? Like we do restart init containers if the container runtime is refreshed, right? That's an implication that, no one would get or just expect to happen unless they thought about it, but it's something we'd need to communicate. So I'm a little worried about any reuse of constants on this type of field.
It goes, I don't think it's that different between init containers and regular containers. So if pod restart policy is always, then init containers will be restarted and regular containers will be restarted. The only difference is once init container run to completion, its lifecycle done, right? So it will stop being restarted. So it's kind of similar if you understand that init container's lifecycle is limited. And I think confusion here is if you put restart policy always to regular init containers that you already have, then the worst that will happen, it will keep restarting over and over again. So you introduce this noise. And it's not, I mean, nothing wrong with this noise. It's just nothing will likely break. On opposite side, if you don't like, you unlikely will make a mistake by placing by removing restart policy always from sidecar container. So if you introduce a sidecar container, you likely intentionally put the restart policy always on that, and unlikely you will remove it. So confusion wouldn't go opposite direction. So I think what I'm trying to say is confusion, even if it will be confusion, this confusion will not break anything. Something's happening with Clayton's audio. I can see Zoom is reconnecting.
Yeah. Maybe we'll wait a moment and see if Clayton is able to respond. I've had mixed takes on this. I've kind of gone back and forth both ways. So I probably, for myself, I'll probably just need to write down the pros and cons as detailed as I can on this one. I'm kind of still on the fence.
Yeah, when I'm doing this logical exercise in my head, I always get to the point when we need a new field expressing this behavior. Because I mean, if you want to make it 100% clear, you will not use restart policy. If you want to make it very close to be clear, but maybe introducing some confusion, then restart policy is a good enough flag, and it doesn't introduce new concepts.
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement that restart policy is probably a good place for it. And I mostly have gone back and forth between, sometimes I see always, and it makes sense to me because it's container level. And so I know that container level is different than pod level. And sometimes when I think about both init containers and main containers, I'm like, is always really the same on them? And I think I can't quite convince myself it's exactly the same, but it's really close. So yeah, I don't think I would challenge it either way right now. I don't know. I can't think of anything more hopeful to say on this one, but I'll think about it more.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this kind of decision is really hard to take back. Like once we go with it, it's not easy to walk back and change it later.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, I think we can go to Tim's comment. There is a big, yeah, this is a big problem. So future use of restart policy field. Again, I introduced this section just to make sure we all on the same page why we're using restart policy field rather than introducing a new field. And I feel that any amount of details I put there, it will get into argument of specific scenarios you're going to support and how the scenario will look like. So I want to put enough details to make it clear that those scenarios exist, but at the same time make it uncontroversial enough that I don't put enough details how exactly they will be implemented. So I think that Tim on this comment wanted to, oh, he replied. Yeah, so yeah, Tim suggestions that maybe we can just list few scenarios here, and then with few scenarios listed here, we can put all the other details in later section. I think I agree with it. And I tried to put the scenarios in the slides as well, so make it a little bit smaller. Yeah, two scenarios that I came up with, which will justify restart policy is if you have a job with a restart policy never, and you have an initialization container that may be flaky, you can make initialization container with on failure, and the job itself will be with the restart policy never. I think it's a reasonable scenario that people may want to implement. And another scenario is if there are two containers, one runs to completion and cannot tolerate restarts, and another can tolerate restarts, and like, why wouldn't you just make it one to be run never, like restart policy never, and another one you can keep restarting if it killed or anything like that. Does anybody have any other smart scenarios in mind?
I thought the scenario list was pretty good.
I don't think they're extremely critical. Yes, they're not extremely critical. I don't think we will implement any of this if you don't need restart policy for sidecars. Okay. Okay. Yeah, it's a team suggested to move it out, and I will do that. Clayton disappeared. Okay. Formula. This is about formula that we will expose in like calculation of resource usage and resource limit. Still expose. And team suggested we put it in pod status and not pod metric. I'm not sure how it works. Joe, do you know?
Let me see. I hadn't read this one, so
I want to expose a resource request and resource limit as something that can be read instead of calculated.
yeah, I think the putting it in status seems okay.
I'm not sure what pod status is. Can you explain? Maybe I just.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So every Kubernetes resource, every YAML has two halves: the spec and the status. So the spec is the declared state of what you want the pod to be, and the status is feedback from the system telling what the actual state of the underlying resources that the YAML represents are in. So I think he's just recommending that we just put a field somewhere in the status.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Is that a recommendation to exclude it from the metrics, or is it going to be in the metrics as well? It would be a shame to not expose that value to the scrapers.
Yeah, putting something in the spec doesn't mean it's not useful in the metrics. So I think those can largely be determined independently. I don't know if Tim had a strong opinion there. He says not a metric, but we could maybe follow up on that.
Yeah, I think metric, you don't want metric because value will never change. It's basically constant that we expose.
I see, right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, sometimes it's just easier to consume metric. At the same time, you can expose metric yourself if you get the status.
Yeah, there are, if you have a metric the system doesn't provide that you need, there are things like kube state metrics. Like there are basically controllers out there that will aggregate data and provide metrics for you. If we think it's something a lot of people need and should be a normal metric and we're willing to use up a little bit of memory for it, we could make the argument that it should be a metric. Sometimes even something that is like static per resource is worth knowing, because then you can count it in aggregate against all the resources and see what percentage of like your cluster have some particular value. So If you see an argument to be made here for metrics, definitely make it. I'd have to think about it more, but I do agree that it should be in the status.
So do you know when status will be calculated? Is it when pod created or when scheduled?
For a lot, it depends. So for a lot of resources, there's a controller that basically is actuating your resource, and it looks at whatever the underlying actual resources are, tries to converge them with your desired state, and then updates the status. I'll be honest, I don't know as much about nodes, so I don't know exactly how some of these get updated. I don't know if there are controllers involved with some of these, like the scheduler. I think it's probably a mix. My guess is that some of the stuff's done by the scheduler and some of it's done by the kubelet, but I don't know for sure. We should clarify that though. Figure out what's going to set the status.
Because I'm pretty sure node name would be in the status, right? I would expect node name to be in the status.
Yeah, we can check real quick, but I think so.
Okay. So
since this formula is fairly complicated, it'd be really nice if it's in the docs as well, so you don't have to go dig through the code to find it. I work on Carpenter, a different cluster autoscaler. In particular, like the daemon set case, it's pretty important to know like what are the exact resources that kubescheduler is going to assume that the daemon set needs, where your pod doesn't exist, so there is no status to look at. So you actually need to calculate it sort of a priori.
Oh, it's a good point. So
yeah, let's
you also need
capture that
formula very early. Okay.
They may affect cluster autoscaler in the scale to 0 place as well. I'm sure they have a very similar issue.
Do you have any suggestions where it can be? Like, if we can expose it, what would it be? Okay, I haven't read Rodrigo's comments yet, so let's try to take a look. We can get back to status. Maybe we can get it as to do. Okay, so it's it's an edge case that we need to test, basically. Okay.
Yeah, it's like a failure mode.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good one.
Yeah, I think other comments are quite minor, just mostly refactoring and rewriting of some statements. Okay, so what we end up is naming.
Yeah, that seems to be the big one.
I think everybody on the same page about restart policy, though, and I think it feels good that at least this one is agreed on.
Yeah, I don't feel like that's, I mean, it's something we'll have to figure out, but I don't think it's like a showstopper, right? Like we need to figure it out before we take the cap too far, but it should be resolvable.
I think we said that we want to split types. Another question was status. What status? Oh, thank you for taking notes, John.
Yeah, sure. I just, there seemed to be a theme about documentation, so I was just writing down what people had said.
Okay. I think we went through all the comments. And now I just want to go through slides really quick. There are some. I want to talk about pattern, like what is sidecar pattern. Then I have some motivation why this pattern doesn't work really easy for some scenarios. And I'm like not terminating jobs. I think it's the biggest problem. After that is service mesh for init containers to ensure that every communication is MTLS, for instance. And then logs from initialization and startup are hard to collect. Typically, people would dump logs somewhere, and then log container will pick it up from this place. But it's a whole new path to pick up logs that needs to be implemented. Some just want gRPC or whatever. Then proposal outlines some highlights what will be implemented, and then how specifically it will be implemented on service mesh. I may need to do something with the font, but basically what I'm saying here is, yeah, I don't know how to zoom. Anyway, so this goes into stages, like what service mesh is typically doing. It gets in some configuration first, then it go through initialization stage, mostly changing IP tables and starting the proxy. Then it goes through initialization of other containers. At this stage, it doesn't take any incoming traffic. So pod is not ready, container is not ready. And then once regular containers start running, we start readiness checks again, and pod start receiving incoming traffic through the proxy. If it fails, it will be restarted, but while it will be restarted, it will be not ready, so incoming traffic will not be sent to the pod, and outgoing traffic will be will not go because proxy is not running. So regular containers will need to do something about it. And then on termination, sidecar will ignore SIG term, and then it will be killed once the pod is completely terminated. And a couple highlights. We want to restart sidecars even during pod termination, and score adjustment also will be changed. Then I went through future scenarios for restart policy, why we use the restart policy versus something else, and go through some alternatives that were rejected for sidecars implementation. And then I'm going into what is sidecar container not. We don't want to guarantee any interdependency between sidecar and other containers. Example here is that when sidecars go down, we don't want anybody to even attempt to go to do some outbound connections. And one way to implement it, by the way, is to rewrite liveness probes for regular containers to point into sidecar. So they instead, like in a port, you can point to different port, and this port may be exposed by sidecar. So sidecar will, in turn, call into regular container, kind of like play like a proxy. That may be one way to implement this. Like if you want guarantee to kill regular container when sidecar is not running, you can do that. but also it wouldn't be guaranteed to be like 1 second delay or something. So we don't do any work to make this really guaranteed. We can provide you tools to do that, but it's not the ideal tools. And finally, sidecars and security boundaries. It's also something that Clayton suggested, and we discussed it on our first meeting. There are desires to make boundaries between containers more precise, specifically like run one container that mounts a disk, and then another container that cannot only can read and write to this disk, so it cannot mount or unmount, so it has less privileges. Same with like modification of IP tables, like only sidecar can modify IP tables. There are ideas how to implement that and how to enforce it. Some people suggesting even to split pod into multiple parts, a multi-part pod, when some containers defined in one object and some containers in another object, and then they need to be merged on a node. And this object can be somehow controlled, ACLed differently. So only one object can have some privilege containers and stuff like that. But we don't plan to implement any of that, mostly because this problem is out like beyond sidecars. Sidecars typically need this kind of things, but other init containers may also want the same. So if we will tackle this problem, we will probably tackle it for both, for regular init containers and for sidecars together. And that's all. I think that explains the cap with a little bit more like visuals. Okay. If there is nothing else, let's call it a meeting. I don't think Clayton is joining back. Let me check messages, maybe. Click. No, I don't have any messages from Clayton, so I will try to get his attention later. And let's see how we can resolve this naming thing.
Sounds good. Getting closer.
Thank you. Bye.
See ya.